The morning air in Seattle was sharp with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen, the kind of damp crispness that made glass towers glisten like polished mirrors. Inside a corner coffee shop, Clara Evans sat hunched over her laptop, her fingers curled tightly round a paper cup gone cold. She stared at the rejection email on her screen for the third time, as though rereading it might change the words. We've decided to move forward with a candidate whose experience more closely aligns with our needs. She didn't need to scroll to the end to see the polite best of luck that always followed. At 27, with a master's in architecture, and student debt still clinging to her like an unwanted shadow, Clara was caught in the endless loop of needing experience to get a job, and needing a job to get experience. The inbox full of polite rejections was proof enough dot around her. The coffee shop hummed with the Monday rush. Laptop keys clattered, milk steamed, baristas called names over the hiss of espresso machines. The world seemed to be in motion except for her. She closed the laptop, pressing her palms to the table as if grounding herself. That's when she saw it. A folded copy of the Seattle Business Chronicle left behind by someone in too much of a hurry to take it with them. She pulled it closer, skimming past the headlines until a familiar face caught her eye. Julian Kane, 32, billionaire, founder of Kane Urban Solutions, the company that had upended the way cities were planned and built. In the photo, he stood in front of a gleaming model of a mixed-use development, sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark hair pushed carelessly back. Beneath the article, almost an afterthought, was a small box announcing Executive Assistant to CEO, applying now. Clara almost laughed out loud. 4 years of school, another 2 of unpaid internships, all to end up fetching coffee for someone who owned a fleet of cars, worth more than her parents' house. She shook her head, but her eyes lingered on the photo. Kane Urban Solutions wasn't just any company. They were the vanguard of urban sustainability projects she had studied obsessively in grad school. You're looking at that like you want to marry it. Clara glanced up to see Ava sliding into the seat across from her, to fresh lattes in hand. Ava was her best friend, roommate, and relentless voice of reason. It's a job posting, Clara said, accepting the coffee for an assistant. Not exactly the dream. Not exactly nothing, either. Ava took a sip. You'd be in the room when big decisions happen. You'd see how projects work from the top down. Better than rotting in some basement drafting renovations no one cares about. Clara hesitated. The logic was there, and her savings account was running on fumes. 2 days later, she stood in the lobby of Kane Urban Solutions, all steel and sunlight, a monolith of ambition piercing the gray Seattle sky. She dressed in her best interview suit, hair smoothed into submission, resume tucked in a sleek leather folder. Her heart beat hard enough to feel in her throat as she approached the receptionist. Clara Evans. I'm here for the executive assistant interview. The woman tapped her keyboard, brows knitting. Conference room to 4B, 39th floor. You're early, but they'll be ready for you. The elevator ride felt endless. Her reflection in the mirrored walls composed to match the fluttering panic in her chest. On the 39th floor, the air was quieter, the lighting warmer. She found the door marked to 4B, knocked once, and stepped inside when a voice called, "Come in." The man at the window turned at her entrance, and the photos hadn't done him justice. Julian Kane was taller than she'd imagined, his presence filling the sleek space. His charcoal suit was tailored to perfection, but it was the eyes that caught her piercing. Analytical, the kind of green that seemed to read straight through you. Clara Evans, he said, extending a hand. Glad you could make it. She crossed the room, shaking his hand, startled by the firm, warm grip. I've been looking forward to this, Julian continued, motioning for her to sit. Your background is impressive, especially your thesis on integrated urban design. I'm curious to hear more about your philosophy on urban integration. Clara blinked. Thesis, urban integration? Her real resume had no thesis, no consultancy background. In an instant, she realized this wasn't the executive assistant interview. She was in the wrong room. Her mouth went dry. She should correct him, explain the mix-up, and back out before she made a fool of herself. Instead, she heard herself say, I believe integration starts with understanding the community, not replacing it. Julian's gaze sharpened, interest sparking. Go on. And so she did, her voice steadying as she spoke from the passion she had carried for years. Not the polished jargon of a consultant, but real ideas she believed in. Julian leaned forward, listening intently. Somewhere deep down, Clara knew the truth would catch up to her. But in that moment, under that green-eyed focus, she couldn't make herself walk away. The air between them seemed to tighten, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to hear what she might say next. Clara swallowed, her hands clasped together on the table. To keep them from fidgeting, Julian Kane wasn't looking at her, the way interviewers usually did, half distracted, glancing at a clock, already deciding if she fit the mold. He was studying her like she'd just placed a puzzle piece on the table that he hadn't known was missing. "I've sat in a lot of meetings," he said slowly, "and most people pitch me efficiency metrics, budget strategies, and speed-to-market plans. You're talking about starting with the community itself. Why? Because the community was the point," Clara thought. Not the shiny buildings, not the press releases, not the perfect drone shot footage for investors. She leaned forward without even realizing it. If you build without them, you're building for them, not with them. And when people feel a project has been done to them, they push back. You lose trust, momentum, and eventually value. But if you start with the people who actually live that listen to them, let them influence the design, you build loyalty and pride alongside the infrastructure. Julian's mouth curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. More the look of someone intrigued against his better judgment. "And what would you say to the investors who think that takes the long, short-term? Thinking makes for short-term gains. If you want longevity, you plan for it. Communities that feel invested will sustain a project longer than any marketing campaign ever could." He didn't answer right away, just watched her. The green in his eyes seemed to sharpen, as she felt a strange heat rise in her chest, half adrenaline, half something else she didn't dare name. Julian sat back, fingers steepled. "Interesting, very interesting." His gaze dropped briefly to a folder in front of him. The name on it, not hers. Definitely not hers. Yet he closed it, deliberately, as though locking away the truth of the mistake for later. "I'm going to be honest," he said finally. "I didn't expect this conversation to go the way it has, but it's been one of the most thought-provoking I've had in months." Clara's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She knew she should say something now, clarify, confess, but he was leaning in again, the faintest glint of challenge in his expression. "I need someone in my corner who can handle logistics." "Yes," Julian continued, "but also someone who can think big, think differently. The kind of perspective you've just shown me is rare." He let that sink in before adding, "I'd like to offer you the position." For a moment, Clara wondered if she misheard. The assistant position, he tilted his head. "Executive assistant, yes. But I'd also like you involved in our urban development think tank. We're moving into a new phase of projects, and I could use that kind of insight." Her breath caught. A door that should have slammed shut in her face had swung wide instead. The pay, he mentioned almost casually, was well beyond anything she'd imagined. She thought about the balance in her bank account, the rejection emails, the nights lying awake wondering if she'd wasted years on a degree she'd never use. "Can you start tomorrow?" he asked. The smart thing, the right thing would be to tell him everything, but the truth hovered on the tip of her tongue. Fragile as glass, if she couldn't bring herself to shatter this moment. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Tomorrow works." Julian's smile was brief, almost unreadable. "Good. I think we're going to make a formidable team." Clara Evans. As she left the building, the Seattle skyline glittered like it knew a secret. Clara's pulse was still racing, her mind caught between exhilaration and dread. She had walked into the wrong room and come out with the kind of opportunity she'd been chasing for years. She just hadn't told him it wasn't hers to take. Seattle's morning mist clung to the glass facade of Kane Urban Solutions like a thin veil, muting the brilliance of the building's steel edges. Clara arrived 30 minutes early. A takeaway coffee clutched like a lifeline. The cup was warm, but her hands were cold, sweaty palms, and adrenaline would do that. She had spent half the night memorizing lists of executive assistant duties from Google, and the other half convincing herself she wasn't completely insane for walking into this. The revolving doors whispered open, ushering her into the lobbies. Quiet luxury, polished stone floors, a cascading wall of greenery, and the soft hum of productivity. Her heels clicked like an accusation against the stillness. A woman with perfect posture and silver hair approached, her tailored suit the color of polished slate. She had the kind of poise that spoke of years spent taming chaos. "You must be Clara Evans." Her voice carried a warmth that didn't soften its precision. "I'm Evelyn Brooks, Mr. Kane's current assistant. I'll be training you before I transition into my new role with our board." Clara's stomach tightened. "Training me?" As if I belong here. Evelyn guided her toward the private elevators, speaking in a brisk, practiced cadence. Mr. Kane starts his day at 6 with a gym session. He drinks his coffee black, no sugar, no cream. The schedule is color-coded, red for urgent, yellow for important, but flexible, green for routine. Never scheduled to reds back-to-back. Always. Leave a buffer for his afternoon walks. He does some of his best thinking then. Clara typed notes into her phone, fingers stiff. It was like cramming for an exam you hadn't known existed until the morning of. The executive floor was quieter than the lobby, the air carrying a faint scent of cedar and something sharper. Julian's cologne, she guessed. His office suite overlooked Puget Sound, the glass stretching from floor to ceiling in a perfect frame of steel blue water. And distant ferries. This will be your desk, Evelyn said, indicating a sleek workspace directly outside his office. The calendar, phone system, and files are cinched here. And here, she handed over a slim tablet, are the project briefs. Kane Urban Solutions has several in progress, but the Hawthorne District revitalization is top priority. Clara glanced at the screen. She'd read about Hawthorne before, an ambitious attempt to transform a struggling neighborhood. Without pricing out the residents, it was exactly the kind of work she dreamed of doing. The kind of work she thought she'd only ever watch. From the sidelines, the office door opened. Julian Kane stepped out, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, hair slightly mussed as if he'd run a hand through it a dozen times already. His presence hit like a subtle shift in the room's gravity. Good morning, Evelyn. Clara. His gaze lingered on her just a fraction longer than necessary, and her pulse responded in kind. Ready for your first day, as ready as I'll ever be, she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Excellent. Evelyn, could you walk Clara through the Hawthorne project files? I want her perspective on some of the community integration challenges we're facing. Clara's heart jolted. This wasn't assistant work. This was dangerous, but she nodded, following Evelyn to the file room where rows of labeled folders gleamed in meticulous order. Evelyn handed her a set of plans and community feedback reports. Some residents fear gentrification. Others worry the economic boost won't be enough to matter. Investors want assurances on both counts. Clara studied the documents, her mind already weaving through possibilities. She forgot to be nervous. What if you created a resident advisory board not just as a PR gesture, but with actual decision-making power? People's support would they help shape? Evelyn looked at her, surprised. That's bolder than what most developers would risk. Before Clara could respond, a voice came from behind them. I like bold. She turned to find Julian in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes alight with interest. Go on, Clara. The words spilled out. Design workshops with parents for playground planning, consultations with local shop owners for retail space layouts, mixed-income housing woven seamlessly into the same blocks. If you make them co-creators instead of just recipients, the project becomes theirs, and they'll protect it. Julian's jaw shifted as he considered it. It would slow us down, but it might eliminate opposition entirely and probably make the final result better. The silence between them was weighted not just with professional consideration, but something else, subtler and harder to name. Finally, he smiled faintly. How do you feel about joining me for the Hawthorne site visit this afternoon? Evelyn's brows lifted ever so slightly, but she said nothing. Clara's pulse spiked. I'd love to. And just like that, the ground beneath her seemed to tilt away from the neat safety of an office desk toward something bigger, riskier, and far more intoxicating. The Tesla's quiet hum was the only sound for the first few minutes as they left the city behind. The rain had finally come, streaking the windshield in silvery threads, blurring the edges of passing buildings. Clara sat in the passenger seat, hands clasped in her lap, watching Julian's profile as he drove. The ease in his grip on the wheel contrasted with the faint furrow in his brow, like his mind was running calculations even as his body moved on autopilot. Have you been to Hawthorne before? He asked without looking at her. Not recently, she said, but I studied the neighborhood in grad school. It was complicated, tight-knit community, but neglected infrastructure. Developers saw it as cheap land. Locals saw them as a threat. That hasn't changed, he said. What I want to do, what I'm trying to do, doesn't fit neatly into the usual profit models. That's why my investors are twitchy. They want their return without the slow burn of community buy-in. She turned in her seat, studying him. And what do you want? Julian's mouth curved faintly. But he didn't answer right away. Something sustainable, not just in terms of the environment, but in terms of people staying, thriving. My father used to say a city's health is measured by whether its children can imagine growing old there. The admission surprised her. It was personal, vulnerable. She felt the pull to ask more, but before she could, they turned down a narrow street lined with brick warehouses and shuttered storefronts. The rain had eased to a mist, leaving the air cool and metallic. Thomas Reed, Kane Urban's head of development, waited near a chain-link fence. He was older than Julian by at least a decade. With a cautious gaze that swept over Clara as she stepped out of the car, "This is our consultant," Thomas asked, his tone more curious than skeptical. Julian didn't correct him. "Clara Evans. She has a unique perspective I want you to hear." They toured the site slowly, Julian listening more than speaking, Clara noting where the cracked sidewalks naturally funneled foot traffic, where empty lots could be converted into green spaces, where corner shops could be restored instead of replaced. She didn't hold back. "If you demolish this block," she said, gesturing to a stretch of row houses, "you'll erase the social fabric holding the street together. Renovate instead. Keep the facades. Modernize the interiors. Residents will feel respected, and architecture will retain its identity." Thomas crossed his arms. "That will eat into budget. Not if you phase it," Clara countered, "and long-term. It stabilizes property values. Less churn, more loyalty." Julian glanced at Thomas. "She's right." The word sent a flicker of warmth through Clara's chest, not because she'd won the point, but because he'd backed her without hesitation. As the tour wound down, they stopped in the middle of what would become the central plaza. Rainwater pooled in uneven asphalt, reflecting the cloudy sky. Julian stood with his hands in his pockets, surveying it. "What do you see?" he asked her. She looked around slowly. A market, weekend concerts, kids weaving between tables while parents talk, string lights overhead, not a plaza heartbeat. He turned his head toward her, and for a moment, the air seemed to still. Most people look at an empty lot and see an empty lot. "You see this?" Her pulse thudded. "And you don't?" "I do now." The ride back to Seattle was quieter, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that hung, charged and full of things unsaid. The skyline emerged from the mist as they approached, glass towers catching the last pale wash of daylight. Julian broke the quiet. "Clara, can I ask you something personal?" Her heart jumped. "Of course. Why architecture? You could have chosen a safer path." She hesitated, then spoke the truth. "Because where people live shapes who they become. Good design connects them. Bad design isolates them. I wanted to be part of the connection." He nodded slowly, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might say something in return, something about himself. But instead, he pulled into the underground garage, the moment sliding away like water off glass. Still, she carried it with her up to the executive floor, knowing something between them had shifted. It wasn't just about projects anymore. It wasn't just about a lie she was still afraid to confess. It was about the fact that Julian Kane had started to trust her, and that trust was a weight she wasn't sure she could hold without breaking. By the time Clara reached her desk the next morning, the executive floor was already humming with the quiet rhythm of high-stakes business. She was halfway through color-coding Julian's calendar when her phone buzzed. Robert Holloway, her old boss. For a split second, she considered letting it ring out. Then curiosity and dread made her swipe to answer. "Clara Evans," she said, injecting more calm into her voice than she felt. "Clara," Robert's tone was strangely chipper. "Interesting news. Our firm just landed the Kane Urban Solutions Community Center contract, and guess what? Julian Kane himself requested you as the liaison architect." Her grip tightened on the phone. Sorry, what? You must have impressed him somewhere along the line." "The meeting's at today. His office. This could be huge for us, don't mess it up." He hung up before she could respond. Clara stared at the phone, her pulse pounding in her ears. The walls of her double life were about to collapse in real time. She considered every option. Tell Julian before the meeting. Disappear and hope the fallout somehow missed her. Fake illness. Each seemed worse than the last. At 1:30, Julian stepped out of his office in a deep navy suit, looking like something off a magazine cover, green eyes bright with anticipation. "Ready for the Morrison architecture meeting, Morrison?" Her voice caught. "They're sending a liaison architect I've heard good things about. Apparently, they share your passion for community integration. Should be interesting to compare perspectives." Her throat felt tight. Julian. Before she could get the words out, Evelyn's voice floated from the reception area. Morrison team is here. Through the glass, Clara saw Robert and two of her former colleagues. Robert's eyes met hers, and confusion flashed across his face. Julian gestured toward the conference room. Come on. I want you in on this discussion. She followed, her legs stiff, her stomach hollow. The opening pleasantries lasted all of 30 seconds before Robert spoke. Carefully, but with an edge. Mr. Kane, I think there may be some confusion. Clara Evans works for us, not for you. She's been with our firm for 3 years. The words hit like a gavel strike. Silence rippled through the room. Julian turned his head slowly toward her, his expression unreadable. Is that so? Clara's mouth went dry. It's complicated. Complicated, he repeated, as if tasting the word. Robert, would you excuse us? The room exhaled as they stepped into Julian's office. He closed the door quietly. You're not my executive assistant, he said, not asking. No. Her voice was small, but steady. You're an architect who walked into the wrong interview. Yes. He moved to the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders rigid. 3 weeks, Clara. 3 weeks I've shared ideas with you, trusted your perspective. Was any of it real? She stepped closer, heart pounding. All of it. My ideas. My passion for urban planning, that was me. I just wasn't who you thought I was on paper. His head turned, and the look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was worse. Hurt. You could have told me the first day. I know. But you were listening. You saw me. I didn't want that to end before it began. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint rush of the city beyond the glass. Finally, Julian exhaled. What do we do now? I resign, she said, the words scraping her throat. Go back to my firm. You can. That's not what I asked. He interrupted. His eyes locked on hers, sharp, searching. What do you want? She swallowed hard. To keep working with you, to keep building something that matters, and she hesitated. But the truth felt too heavy to keep, to see where. Whatever. This is between us might go. Something flickered in his gaze. Conflict, maybe. Or the first edge of forgiveness. What you did was wrong, he said quietly. But what you've brought to this company. His voice trailed off. He stepped closer, close enough that she could catch the faint spice of his cologne. Has been invaluable? Her breath caught. Does that mean? It means, he said, his mouth curving in something, like a challenge, that if we start over honestly this time, I want you here. Not as an assistant, as a consultant. The title you should have had from the beginning. Clara's pulse surged, relief flooding through her so fast it made her dizzy. Interested? He asked. Very. She breathed. Good. Then let's go finish this meeting. But before they reached the door, he stopped her with a hand on her arm. One more thing about Diana. She froze. You don't owe me explanations about your personal life. I had dinner with her last night, he said, his voice even, her chest tightened, bracing for the answer. And I realized what we had was comfortable, expected, but not real. Not like this. The way he looked at her then made it impossible to breathe. I told her I was already involved with someone else, he said. If she's interested, her lips curved despite the chaos of the last hour. She's interested. The smile that broke across his face was the first genuine one she'd seen all day. When they walked back into the conference room, Robert's confusion was almost comical. Clara sat down beside Julian, the air between them charged with something that hadn't been there before, something more than professional, something worth every risk she'd taken to get here. 6 months later, the Hawthorne district no longer felt like the neglected corner of the city it had been. When Clara first walked through it in the rain, the cracked sidewalks had been repaired, but not replaced entirely. Each one kept the etched initials, faded chalk flowers, and scuffs of children's games that had always belonged there. Old warehouses had been transformed into life-filled co-op studios and affordable lofts. A line of small businesses bustled along the main street, their awnings bright against freshly restored brick. The community center stood at the heart of it all. Glass walls opening onto a sunlit plaza, alive with movement. Children darted between. Tables where parents drank coffee, elderly residents chatted on benches under young maple trees, and a jazz trio played near the fountain that Clara had insisted be designed for waiting in summer. She stood by the center's wide windows, hands resting on the cool railing, watching the life outside as if it were a heartbeat she'd helped restart. Somewhere in that plaza, She could see the silhouettes of families she remembered from the first design workshop's faces. That had been skeptical at first, even hostile. Now they waved at her when they passed, their expressions warm and unguarded. You look like someone who just saw her blueprint step off the page. Julian's voice came from behind her, low and amused. She turned to find him walking toward her, his suit jacket over one arm, tie loosened. His green eyes still had that habit of locking onto hers like no one else was in the room. I'm watching the city breathe, she said softly, and realizing I don't regret a single thing that got me here, not even the wrong room. He teased, stepping close enough that his hand brushed her waist. Especially the wrong room, she said, smiling. They stood together for a moment, the murmur of the crowd drifting in through the open doors. It was easy to forget, now, the weeks of tightrope walking between her secret and the truth, the confrontation in his office, the sharp edge of hurt in his voice. How they decided carefully, deliberately to balance the professional with the personal. Knowing it could all fall apart if they misstepped out, it hadn't been simple. There had been late nights when deadlines pressed in, when her ideas challenged, investor demands, and his decisions frustrated her enough to slam doors. But every fight had ended with the same realization: they were better together, professionally. Personally, in ways neither of them had anticipated. "You've changed how I do business," Julian said, his tone quieter now. "Not just with Hawthorne, with all of it. You made me remember why I started this company in the first place." She tilted her head, studying him. "And you made me believe I could do this, that my ideas mattered." His smile was slow, genuine. "They more than matter. They're the reason we're standing here right now." Outside, the band shifted to a softer melody. The golden light of late afternoon spilled through the windows, gilding everything it touched. Julian's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, as she felt that same rush she'd felt the day he told her he wanted to start over. Honestly, this time, he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers in a kiss that was gentle but threaded with the weight of everything they'd been through: the deception, the risk, the rebuilding of trust. When they pulled apart, he didn't let go of her hand. "You know," he said, glancing at the plaza, "I've been thinking about something. Your friend Ava said to me a few months back. She told me you've always believed in designing spaces where people can find the best version of themselves." Clara's brows lifted. "Did she?" "She also said you never admit that you've been doing the same thing to me for 6 months. Clara laughed, shaking her head. "I'm not taking credit for that. You should," he said, his voice warm, "because I think I like the version you found." They stood there a little longer, watching the plaza fill with the glow of string lights as dusk crept in. Somewhere in the crowd, a child's laughter cut through the music, clear and bright. Clara tightened her grip on his hand. "Sometimes," she murmured, "you have to become someone else before you can figure out who you really are." Julian kissed her again, deeper this time, and when they parted, his voice was certain. "And sometimes, the wrong door leads you exactly where you were meant to be." The city outside seemed to agree, pulsing with life as the lights came on, proof that even the most unexpected beginnings could build something lasting. And for Clara, this was more than a finished project. This was home.